Yeah.
Oh, really quiet.
Let's turn the
Projector on here.
Sorry,
You're fine. I always put you down here because I know you got to plug in.
you got plug issues.
Sorry.
Do you need to run anything? Is that?
I don't think we need to run any.
I just mean like if your
No, we don't have
throat
to
is
sort
sore.
of
Oh,
run.
thank
If
you.
you start to get coffee or stuff.
Thank you.
feel
I think I'll be all right. Yeah. It's 6:35 on Wednesday, April 16th, and our first order of business is public comment. We don't have anybody in the room, but maybe we have and we don't have anybody on Zoom, so we will keep right on rolling. The next order of business is the consent agenda, which is just very simple, ordinary, sometimes really exciting, but doesn't need much discussion. It's business of the board. So we just put it all together into one item on the agenda and vote on it all at once. So is there anyone who would like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move.
Thanks, Jim. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Jill. Is there any discussion?
I just want to say this is one of the most exciting, no, I'm not even joking, consent agendas though. There's a lot of good news in there,
There is a
so.
lot of good news in there.
I can't see both at the same time, so I'm just looking at what all the good news is.
Well, we would like to congratulate Rachel
Yes.
Whalen on
Rachel
her
Whalen.
new
Yep.
position as principal of Union Elementary.
Yes.
And we have a contract with our teachers for next year, which we're very excited
They have yet
about.
to ratify it.
Which
but-
they have yet to ratify, but we are excited about
Yeah.
Yes.
as a board. And of course, the superintendent's report, which I mistakenly called mundane last meeting and did not intend to do so. Okay, any other discussion? All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so then do we have a presentation, Amani, from students?
Scott and I were just gonna talk about the, new student representatives that we're trying to find for this upcoming year. Miriam couldn't make it today because she's at the track meet that I'm not at.
I'm not at either.
Yeah, so, yeah, we just wanted to put it out there, I think, Anna followed up with an email today, so that has been more broadly advertised. I think one person I know was gonna send an email today, I don't know if that happened yet, but there's one person in my TA who I've been talking to, they applied last time when I applied
Yeah, I think Miriam sent an email, I don't know who, it went broadly out to
MHS students, I think.
MHS
Yeah.
students, the end of March, and then I know Matt McLean has been doing some one-on-one engagement with students to try to drum up support. Anna, and then I think Jason maybe also sent a message, so the news is out, so we're just trying to
Can you-
replace the irreplaceables.
It's gonna be a hard task. Can you remind us what the deadline is for their letters of interest?
In here, it's the 18th of April. which-
Okay, well, that's Friday, this Friday,
Yeah,
which can be still in the future.
yeah, so we'll see, if we get 2 letters of interest by then.
Mm-hmm.
And then the intent was to have them join the May 7th meeting.
Okay.
And so I think we have a little bit of wiggle room
Yep.
on that deadline, but
We could push.
with April break, it gets a little tight.
Yeah,
So-
no, we could, well, and we probably could have them come to the meeting on the 21st instead. Instead of the 7th if we needed to push the deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
We could,
we got some, like you said, some wiggle
we
room.
got some buffer,
Alright.
so get the news out.
Okay, well then let's move into board discussion. It looks like we have financials first before talking about the legislation. So who's kicking off the financials? All right, Tim,
Can I please?
take it away.
We just heard from, so we'll start with the 24-25 financial audit. We just got a presentation in our operations committee meeting from Christina. It was a clean audit where there were no findings, which was great.
Bless you.
She did note that there was a fund balance decrease of $3,000. It had to do with the timing of an invoice that was booked. It was a July-June invoice that got paid and but accrued a month earlier. So the adjustment was made, but it's nothing substantial. Christina did point out to us, if you're interested in the amount of federal funds we receive, on page 41 of the audit, it shows that we receive about $2.5 million of federal funds, relevant in this day and age to keep in mind, but nothing of note for audit purposes. And at the end, it always looks at whether or not there are any material weaknesses or other things like that, and there are none. So unsurprising, a clean, strong audit, and the operations committee, I think, would recommend that the board approve the audit as presented, and happy to muddle through any questions and maybe look to Libby for help if anyone has them.
And so we'll do those separately, right? The financial audit and the quarter 3 report?
However you want to do it.
Yeah, why don't we do that? And so are you making a motion?
I would move approval of or acceptance, or
You don't approve it, yeah, you just accept it.
we accept
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I would
Okay.
move acceptance of the 24-25 financial audit.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great. Any discussion or questions for the committee or Libby? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And then the third quarter report?
Third quarter report. Christina also just presented this in our operations committee. She highlighted a few items that the board might want to look at. One of them on the revenue side was our rental revenue. We budget $10K for rental revenue that's renting the facility out for different events. I think the practice these days is to generally not charge, particularly for things that are going to be beneficial to our student population. So we're not receiving the amount of revenue we budgeted with a budgeted amount of $10,000. That's not a huge thing, but it was something that she noted. State aid for transportation, that's running pretty high, and it's unclear why. If you look at the revenue side of the financials that were presented, we budgeted 112,000 and our actuals to date are 206. So that is a substantial surplus. I think it's consistent with what neighboring school districts are seeing. So while I guess we're not 100% sure why, it's not something that I think anyone's going to oppose. What else do we have? After-school revenues are coming in low. This is as expected and as we addressed in our upcoming budget year, where we lowered the amount that we're expecting. And we have some additional revenues coming in. It's in miscellaneous other revenues. It has to do with an E-rate reimbursement, which, if you want any more than the name, I'm going to look to Libby on that.
Technology infrastructure is a federal piece that we can get rebates on.
That's on the revenue side. Those were the notes that Christina highlighted for us. On the expense side, general education, the one thing there is that we do have 4 long-term subs, and that I didn't get the sense that that presented a concern or a worry or anything. It was just something that created some uncertainty going in, because long-term sub expenses are not encumbered as typical teacher expenses. So something to watch, but not something to worry about.
But they show up in the general education
Gen Ed.
line?
Right, and so if you see, there's a note
Oh,
there.
I see it, 4
no
long-term
open
subs.
positions, but there are 4 long-term subs, so that's, it's something that, until we kind of close, I don't think we're gonna know if that's something that's gonna be up or down. There was some unplanned facilities expense with the flood in this, it was in this room, right? And I guess that it was some costs that were not reimbursable by insurance, I guess because they were somehow related to exterior and piping water around from outside that then backed up into here, which caused the flood to come up through the floor. And I think she also noted there were a few extra expenses in special ed expenses. So no worries, no concerns that she flagged for us. Committee members, am I missing anything that we should highlight? I will just, if nothing on the revenues, I will just follow up on the discussion we had. There was the possibility, I guess, to apply for, and this, when you look at the report in the capital fund, it talks about something we were going to talk about at our meeting. And so just to recap on that, there's as many are following from the federal government, ESSER funds are being pulled back, the extra ESSER funds. There is a remote possibility we could throw in a very late proposal for improvements at the middle school playground. I guess word is that for any of these late proposals, I don't know if that's the right word, but that's the general idea, is they're supposed to be reading in nature. That is at least the unofficial word that's being heard. So making the tie between a outdoor playground and literacy improvement might be a bit of a stretch. And I think from in a practical perspective, if we were to go for that, I think Libby would have to do it tomorrow, and we would have to basically build the thing immediately. Talking to Libby, Tom, and Christina, it seemed like there's a much better opportunity to have a thoughtful and planned approach, potentially involving students in the middle school, to think about and vision what their improvements could be there. And so that seems to be the preferred approach, and with the idea that it would be unlikely that we receive any funds in this ESSER solicitation, we all thought it made sense to pass on that and do the more thoughtful approach.
And then how would we pay for it? Would it be a capital fund?
It would be capital fund balance type of approach, but we would look at that within the context of overall capital needs. So
Yep.
I think, generally speaking, a much more thoughtful and prudent approach. That is the report I have. If there are any additions from committee members, I'll maybe move right now that we accept the third quarter financials as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, Rhett's got it. Any questions or discussion? I did have a question on the expenses side for the ones that are, if we're 3/4 of the way through the year and we've got expenses that are more like we've spent 88% of the budget, or 98% of the budget. Are any of those ones where we think, okay, we're probably gonna go over budget for the year, or are there some of those where we're like, oh no, we should be actually spending 90% by this time of the year because there's almost nothing left to spend for the last quarter?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. As I understand it, this is the new presentation that Christine has been doing where she's presenting actuals and encumbered. So when you look at the percentage.
Oh, okay.
That is both, that's a percent of funds that have actually been spent, but that are encumbered for spending in the balance of the fiscal year. So it doesn't mean that we've spent, necessarily 88% or 89%. It means that we've spent or encumbered it.
Okay,
And we will spend it. Libby, is that a fair?
Yeah, and if she's got no concerns there,
Yeah.
if there's nothing in the comments area, then she legitimately has no concerns.
Okay.
Like where it says general, like education, the comment is for long-term subs.
right,
Like, so that could potentially go over.
got it.
because
That's the uncertainty.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay,
So she's telling the board where that, you could look at that. And like technical education, there's 37% encumbered and spent because it comes later in the year, so.
and I don't understand what encumbrance means.
So you've,
We plan to spend it?
yeah,
Okay.
you've.
We can't use it for
stated-
something else.
Right, you've stated you're spending that.
Got it. Now I understand it. Anybody have any other questions?
I think it's a good way to present it. I appreciate that she split it out like that. I think it's taken me a while to get used to it,
Yeah.
honestly, but I think ultimately helps us get a better picture. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I do
effort on her
too.
behalf.
We have all of these teachers, we know what we're paying them, we know how long we're paying
Totally.
them for, we might as
Yeah.
well account for it.
She's good.
Oh, yeah, Rhett?
Looking down at the last page, the fund balance piece and the track improvements, is all of that going as expected? Is there still quite a bit more to be spent or encumbered? Are we gonna need as much as was originally committed, or is that not yet known, or?
I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
Somebody might,
Yeah,
but I don't, but I can certainly find out for you, right?
I mean. I
It's
hope
not
that-
a challenge at all to find out, so I can certainly find out. I just haven't been a part of those conversations and what their plans are for it.
I'm hoping that kids get nicely improved facilities and as best as we can.
Yeah, I know they've been working on it. I'm gonna look at my track star over there. Where the softball field is, there's like is it a discus throw, a pole vault? Those are the track equipment pieces I know. I don't actually know what they are, but I'm not a track athlete.
I think the softball area was either gonna be shot put or discus.
It's something like that. It's something flying to keep away from the
Yeah.
the running athletes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think we're equipped for pole, I think it's high jump that we are trying to get nicer for, and then long jump as well. But fortunately, we're able to go to U32 most days and practice there, but, yes, everyone would like a less dirt track, but, hasn't happened
Not
yet.
everyone.
But I can certainly get that and put it in maybe my next superintendent's report.
Sure, yeah. The lantern parade went around and there were some poles, which I'm guessing are for netting for safety for one reason or another.
Oh, those poles at the
So
end,
that-
one
yeah.
end, yeah.
Yeah, the netting went up because it's to keep the lacrosse balls from hitting the lacrosse, or the track kids in the head.
It's a good thing.
Yep.
Yeah, it's hard with all the practices, like, it's fortunate that we go to U32 a lot, but the middle schoolers also come to the high school.
Right.
And lacrosse practices there or has games there frequently, and, nets are good, they're high on the ends, but not the sides.
Yeah.
The sides you just have to watch out.
Yeah. Any other questions on the third quarter report? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? All right, next order of business is the state of affairs for education in Vermont, brought to us by Libby Bonesteel,
Yeah, doing the best you can.
which is
Okay.
all we ever ask.
All right, let me share my screen with those folks at home. Here we go. Does that look okay from your end? Yeah, okay, good.
And school board members do have it as well.
Yeah,
They have the-
everybody can pull it
yeah.
up to follow along. Okay. So, this is the legislative update and forecast, and when I say forecast, it's Libby Bonesteel's educated opinion and guess as to forecast, so I want to put that out there. This bill is not law as of yet, it's in the hands of the Senate right now, which I'll talk about in a minute, and it will likely change a lot in the Senate's hands. So, I can answer as many questions as I can, some with some fact of what people have presented thus far, some with my educated opinions, and some with me looking straight to Jake and Jill to talk about tax impacts, and some that all three of us are probably gonna say, I have no idea, because we haven't figured that out yet. So there is this idea for transformation in Vermont for education. I do put that in quotes because I'm not positive if any of these plans actually achieve that, but that's the point, that's the goal. Just a little timeline of how we got here. Last year, they changed the weights, the legislature changed the weights. It was the first year for that. There was other huge financial pressures on budgets, including a large healthcare increase and salary increases. And that was a result of a third of school budgets going down last year. In the first attempt, some didn't have, like Barry didn't have a school budget until this fall for their school district. So then the governor's inaugural address, during that time, Governor Scott stated that he believed that his reelection plus the failed budgets equaled a mandate to bring down property taxes. And that was the first time he announced a major education transformation plan. January through March of this year, testimony began. Of course, our legislature begins their work in January, so it couldn't have started any earlier. And Agency of Education officials begin to testify during this time on pieces of their plan. They roll it out pretty slowly for legislation, and with a lot of help from outside consultants' work. Local education officials, including yours truly, counter a lot of the state's testimony or offer an alternative perspective on certain aspects of it. And the discussion starts to center around districts consolidation, school choice, and a foundation formula. And in February, the agency or the state entity presents H-454 that's taken up by the House Education to revise as a strike-through bill. So the House Education did not create their own bill. They used what the state provided in order to play within the same sandbox. House Ways and Means at the same time was working on developing the foundation formula for the bill. The governor's plan in H-454 had a foundation formula in it, and the House Ways and Means looked at it to revise, just like the House Education looked at it to revise. Yes, accurate so far? You guys jump in. Did I say anything wrong? So there are some ideas between what I'm gonna call the House, because they were the main, the House Education and House Ways and Means were the main committees that really dug into this bill in a way that gave some thought to the ideas to it. Senate Education and Senate Finance did as well, but not as in-depth, I would argue. So for instance, superintendents or the Vermont Superintendents Association and the Vermont School Boards Association were in the House Education Committee almost every day, if not every other day, and VSA testified once, was invited to testify once in front of Senate Education. So they had different priorities as this bill was moving through. So there are ideas in H-454 where there appears to be agreement between the House and the governor's plan. I say with stars there between the legislature and the governor's office because I don't know how much of the public actually understands or is paying attention, as evidenced by there's no public here as we're talking about it, right? So I don't know if there's any agreement in public opinion, nor do I know if the public truly agrees with the governor that his reelection and failed budgets equals a mandate for a lot of change. But that is a Libby Bonesteel opinion that others might share. So where there appears to be some agreement is that the idea of increased scale across the board in larger districts, filled school buildings, an alignment of graduation requirements across school buildings, and an alignment of one school calendar for the state, and alignment in data systems in the terms of student and financial systems. Okay, there seems to be a wide agreement that those things should happen between the legislative body, composed mainly of the House Education Committee and House Ways and Means, and the governor's plan. What that looks like is 5 basic buckets. So where I say appears to be agreement, they're not agreeing on what it is, they're agreeing on the theme more than anything, okay? So that's important to know. So there seems to be an agreement that governance structures could use some change in Vermont. Governance structures are you all, our school boards, when we say that. There seems to be an agreement that there's some room to achieve an economy of scale in schools and districts across Vermont. There seems to be an agreement that the funding formula needs to change, and the agreement appears to be focusing in on a foundation formula, which is the direct opposite of how we fund schools now. And there seems to be an agreement that there should be a legislative timeline for change. What that timeline is, there's no agreement there, but there's an agreement that there should be a timeline, and it should be done legislatively, not up to school boards and districts. So that's about where the agreements end, pretty much, just around the themes. So there are different strategies to achieve these themes that I can walk through a little bit. And I'd say write questions. This isn't a long presentation, so if you have questions, write them down and we'll talk about it afterwards. Yeah. So under governance structure, the House bill wants to do this thoughtfully and use the Commission on the Future of Education to develop 3 different plans for the legislative body to consider by 2026. The governor's plan wants to immediately consolidate our current system of governance into 5 statewide school districts with 5 school boards. In terms of achieving scale, the House would like to establish class size minimum standards. And when I was listening to a lot of testimony on this, they were using our policy as a model policy for class size minimums, which I was pleased to see because I think we have a pretty good class size policy. And establish a high school size no less than 450 students unless necessary. That's the wording in H454 right now. They passed on establishing a K through 8 school size.
Enrollment size.
Yeah, they passed on that. They did not want to touch it. The governor's plan does not assume a minimum. It assumes that kindergarten through, 3rd grades have 15 students per class. And grades 4 through 12 have 25 students per class. Okay, so they're kind of setting the norm of class size. And it completely ignores school size. So there's a link in the presentation that I won't go into great depth on right now, but I highly recommend you look at this. I testified on this in Senate Finance a couple months ago, and the Agency of Education relied on a consulting firm collaborated with a consulting firm out of Colorado, I believe, called APA, and they put together, based on this PICUS report that was written around school size, what they believe school staffing should be. And that's how they base their adequacy rate, which we'll get to with the funding formula later on, right? That's how they base some of their numbers on. And so my testimony and what I wanted to find out was, okay, here's what PICUS and the Agency of Education suggest for staffing for school sizes. Here's our school size. So it's like a ratio, it's a percentage of the PICUS size and where we're currently staffed. And so if we went with the funding formula that the agency was presenting, what would that mean for us, right? That's what I wanted to find out. What it would mean for us, if we took them for their word in the governor's plan, we would be riffing about 100 positions in our school district. And it's about a $3.3 million difference. So there's some connection with the funding formula, but I put that in there just as like a way to look, one way to look at it. It's nothing to get excited about, or it's nothing to get really worried or anxious about. It's just an interesting data point for us to consider. In terms of funding formula, the House bill has a transition from the current formula to a foundation formula by 2029, and the governor would like this to happen in 2027. So with the scale that they've suggested, so that would be potential pretty deep cuts for MRPS in 2 years. So I believe Tim emailed a question to me, like, when would this come into play? It depends on which plan you're looking at and what the Senate decides to do with it. So right now, it's anywhere from FY '28, from school board language, when you're, right, Jake, from when you're planning out budget years, FY '28 to FY '30. In school years, it would be not next year. We'll most likely go through a regular budget season next year, like we have in the past, using what we do now for education funding. Governor would like the year after to move into a foundation formula, and the House would like to take longer in terms of the timeline. In terms of timeline, the House bill transitions year to year with new districts operational in July of 2029. The governor has a much more accelerated plan to restructure everything by July 2027. I was a part of a timeline sprint team with the Agency of Education, and as part of that work, I created an actual timeline with superintendent colleagues of all the work that would need to happen. Because I simply didn't believe that the governor's team truly understood all the things that would need to happen in order to do this change, not even thoughtfully, but just in order to do this change. And you can see that work. I put it all on paper based on what my knowledge is with MRPS, and then I shared it with business managers, curriculum directors, superintendents, and they added a lot to it. So if anybody can look at that timeline, you can see that there's a lot of work that needs to happen in order to make anything like this a reality, mainly because it's not like the merger that Montpelier-Roxbury experienced in 2017-18. It's not a bigger district taking in a smaller district. It's quite literally making a new district, like a brand spanking new district where nobody's like subsuming another one. And so that takes more time and effort with that. So if we keep going.
And Libby, I just also shared with the board the timeline that Joint Fiscal Office did of just the House bill. I mean, as of the moment, knowing it could change.
Yeah, I think I shared that too.
I think you did.
Yeah. Okay, so with the House bill, it preserves the State Board of Education as a publicly accountable body. In the governor's plan, it takes a lot of that, a lot of the role of the state board and centralizes it under the Agency of Education. In terms of tuitioning, the House bill wants to limit tuition to approved independent schools in Vermont that serve a majority of Vermont students. And in the governor's plan, it creates a new school choice statewide. Like, so each of those 5 mega districts would have choice within it, as well as the independent schools, or it could be the independent schools could be part of that school choice that serve a majority of Vermont students. So it's widening school choice. Under rules. And school construction, the House bill creates a plan that prioritizes construction aid by need, and school construction is not addressed at all in the governor's plan. They don't mention it. So in terms of the funding formula, I created me off of some of your questions. I just created a little handy dandy chart today and yesterday. So you can see in the second column there where it's Act 127 weights, and where it says MRPS FY26, that's our per pupil spending. So keep in mind the way that education is funded right now, every district has a different per pupil spending, right? Because it's what we ask for based on our budget. The foundation formula would say you don't do that anymore. There is a base per pupil amount that you get. So that's where the base equals there, or an adequacy amount, depending on what people are calling it. So you can see what the weights were for Act 127 in there. I put them in there for you. And then you can see in H454, this is based on work by Tammy Colby, who is a Montpelier-Roxbury parent. And she also was the lead researcher with the Act 127 weights. So she is highly versed in Vermont budgeting, Vermont needs, Vermont proficiency. So those are in revised from Tammy's revised work. And there's also a link to, I guess it's a policy brief that Tammy Colby wrote, if you want more information about how she came to her numbers. Right there, you can see her name is linked. And then the governor's plan also linked, his plan is also linked in here with their base rate and the weights, with the small schools having lots of weights. So I just cut and pasted it right from the governor's plan instead of making lots of different rows for that. A big change would be in special education that I'm not actually completely positive about right now. I don't have all the information I need, but currently we have a block grant for special education. And I believe in both H454 and the governor's plan, the weighting for the block grant would go away and weighting would be based on special education determination.
That wasn't in governor's plan, but it is in H4.
Okay, I wasn't positive about that. I can correct that so that we have the right information. So is the block grant still?
In the governor's plan is, yeah, the block grant would still exist, but the APA was suggesting that they should maybe do a weight
An
eventually.
additional weight? Yeah, I'll correct that in this presentation, so we make sure that we have the right information, because I wasn't positive on that. So last week, the bill was in the, H454 was in the House's hands. It made it through the House with some amendments. The amendments to the original bill from the House Education and Ways and Means was that it changed the composition of the redistricting working group to include some legislatures, which is not a huge amendment. It added a working group that would work in parallel to redistricting group to create voting wards. And this was an attempt to make the timeline quicker. It was a concession. And then adding a study committee to study the impacts of taxing different types of properties at different tax rates. And its response to the business community's concerns about dividing up the non-homestead tax categories. So there were small amendments coming out of the House. It's now in the Senate. So I'm skipping two slides here because I think they're out of order. The bill is now in the Senate. It was at the first reading by Senate Education and Finance Committees on Monday, 4/15, Monday.
That's yesterday.
Yesterday, Tuesday. They don't work on Mondays.
And they didn't finish, they're still making their way through it.
They're still making their way through it. It's a long bill. We do have some expectations in the Senate. We expect the Senate to make major significant amendments to the bill. There is lots of lobbying happening right now from school choice advocates, as well as the Rural School Collaborative, that do not want any kind of consolidation because they're reading the tea leaves and that would mean closing small schools. They also don't like the class sizes. And there could be a reduction in the adequacy amount from the House version that actually hasn't been stated, but it's kind of what people are talking about a little bit.
That's the base amount for the
yeah.
foundation formula.
Yeah, and the governor is already signaling the House bill as is would be vetoed. So it's likely to head to conference committee where they'll duke it out. So if we go back to the last slide where it's main takeaways, these are ideas that may happen. When I first made this presentation, that said ideas that most likely will happen. However, because I'm not positive what the Senate is going to do, like this is Libby Bonesteel's opinion right here. Other people can have different opinions. The consolidation of districts may happen. It might be too hard. It might be that the legislators get so much pushback they don't have the votes to do that because of the lobbying with the small rural schools collaborative and the independent schools. So who we would merge with if that were to happen, it depends on the appropriate size of district that eventually will be decided by the legislature, right? The governor's plan has mega districts that and has no research to back up actually being efficient. There's actually research that says they're not efficient at that size. And the legislature is working off of a 2,000 to 4,000 range right now. The foundation formula most likely will happen. I'm looking at my experts over here. Yeah, most likely will happen in the next few years. Statewide class size, district calendar, student information finance systems, those will probably happen as well. District calendar, there's like 3 districts who have a different start day next year. And other than that, we have a state calendar. So there's like 2 differences. So we're there on that already.
Libby, can I ask you a question about the, like vacations statewide? Cause this is the southern part of the state.
Yeah,
they have-
next year we're all on the same
Okay,
calendar.
so
Like
they-
Soup's made an effort to do it.
Okay,
to do it.
fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, so we're all on the same. We have different negotiated agreements, so it's not
Yeah.
exactly the same, but our vacations are lined up next year.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And school start date is lined up with the exception of the Lamoille schools, essentially. I think they're the only ones. Ideas that need to happen to recognize scale and achieve financial efficiency. School size determination at all levels. So one thing that one piece of language that the Secretary of Education, Secretary Saunders, has brought in is small by necessity versus small by choice. I think that does need to be decided upon, like with numbers, right? Like that's not just a guess that people can find loopholes through, but that is an important factor that needs to be figured out. Without figuring out what small by necessity versus small by choice, then there's going to be either cuts to programming or increases in taxes. There's no other way to save money except looking at schools. School construction and a renovation fund has to happen in order to realize this. My buddy Mike Licklider over at Harwood tells how he could easily combine 2 very close elementary schools that are like, I don't know, 4 or 5 miles apart, but he needs renovation to fit 2 classes in, right? Like, so the school building itself is a problem. And that's just one story out of many from superintendents who say, yeah, I could merge very easily 2 buildings. However, the building itself either is in such dire straits or we would need a new building. Up north, for instance, if they were to merge all into one building for, high school, they would need to build a new high school building to fit the kids. So we need to deal with, as a state, the healthcare increases. Next year, we're predicted to go anywhere between 17% and 20% right now. A lack of housing and a lack of community-based mental health supports for kids and families. We have to deal with that in order to get costs down. And there's the fact that's like kind of the white elephant in the room, but may actually come to fruition. Doing nothing is really not sustainable. It will just continue to be increased property taxes or gutting programming for kids. And those are the people in Steele's opinion. So keep that in mind.
That's how Libby sees it.
Exactly. On the where's the bill now, at the bottom, there is a policy brief by a UVM professor that's focusing on the major she really challenges the governor's plan and makes some pretty good points to that. So it's worth a read. It's not very long. It's like 4 pages. It's worth a read.
Rhett printed it out in case anybody wants it in hard copy.
Hard copy.
Yeah, real paper.
So I am happy to try to answer any questions that the board has. I will preface answers with this is Libby's opinion versus this is what I know, or I don't know, or I'll look straight to Jill and Jake to give tax information and money information, probably.
The Libby's opinion question, do you think if there was a weight for special ed, that it would go back to the same problem that there was before the block grant, where it's overdiagnosis?
Yeah, you're asking us to, I don't know if here's my thing on that. Yes, right, it does benefit a school district then to identify a student with special needs, because you're giving us money, right? And it could be a kid who doesn't need a whole lot of services, but you're still getting more money, right? I don't know if educators think that way though. When they're making the determination and talking about which gates are going through and all that kind of stuff. It's not like, well, we need some money, you know, like nobody's thinking about that. Would it be easier though, knowing if a student's identified and we know we're gonna get money to pay for that specialized services? Does that ease some pressure maybe? I don't know. I mean, if a student has a disability and qualifies, and we can qualify them. So I don't know. So there is the theory that that benefits schools to identify more kids. I don't know if it's accurate though.
I feel like, you know, some other state must have a reasonable solution in that space, you know. I don't know what they're doing, but I know what Vermont did to try to correct it. And then this would be going back to the pre-block
Right.
grant
Right.
type of, I mean, it's different, but it's.
Yeah, it is
Basically-
different because I think these weights are based on disability category, and adding more weights to disability categories that require more services is my understanding.
Yeah, I think that might be true.
Yep.
And also my other question, Libby, opinion question is like, what does it matter, you know, what the amount of money is, like, if what's to compel the school district to actually spend it on that student? You know, if you have a student who's in poverty, who's learning a foreign language and is special ed, maybe they generate $75,000 of state money, but the district doesn't have to spend it on that student.
Well, it's not the way we think of budgeting.
Right.
Right.
I mean, like, my terrible example with Act 127 was like, all right, you have this heavy English language learner weight. You could take that money and send your AP English kids to England for a semester to study Shakespeare.
You
Like,
very
there's
well could, yeah.
there's no,
Because it goes into one pot.
right.
Yeah.
So why, you know, why?
Or you
What's
don't
that weight?
spend it. You know, you have school districts who, you know, with 127, they got a significant tax capacity increase and they didn't take it. They,
Yeah.
you know, they voted down their budget.
Well, it was eaten up by everybody else's tax
Right,
increase
right,
or
right.
spending increase.
Right.
So I just don't get it, like, you know, shouldn't the money go to the students at least in some way? Like, should there be a general tracking, or like, should there be a law that says, you know, you shall spend your education opportunity payment in proportion to the students who are generating it or
Generating the
something?
money. Yeah, I'm not sure. It makes sense, because what you're saying is correct, right? You could have multilingual learners and not hire multilingual teachers,
Right.
but have that revenue coming in. I think that's while that is an accurate statement, I don't know of a school district that would do that, right? Like, if there's a need, multilingual is a good example, right? They're not gonna let that need.
Well, I'm a
be
tax
more.
guy, so I'm always thinking of loopholes.
I know. Yeah. I have trust in my educator colleagues that they get the services they need.
I see that Jim has a question. Why don't we get a stack going?
Yeah,
There
so,
are others?
so assuming you go to a foundation formula, how would that actually work in terms of the budget? Would, like, you know, X district has 5,000 students, so is it just 5,000 times 15,000, and that is what goes to the district and the budget is kind of set? Or would the district have the ability to say, well, that's great, but we want to spend an extra $7,000 students, so we're going to separately raise funds and be better than everyone else? And then does that create a bigger problem?
Yes. So the answer there to all of that is yes. There's no or, right? So yes, we would get one set amount that we would know, which would help with budgeting purposes to know, right? And we would be designing our programming based on that amount that we
Whatever
have.
proceeds
There is some, and I'm gonna use my buddy Jake over here to add anything on. There is some provisions to try to figure out how a district could raise more money proportional to every district in the state. So no one district, so CVU can't raise a significantly more amount of money than Franklin Northeast can. I don't believe we really have the mechanism to do that yet. And there's a Brigham problem. So for our public, Brigham was a Supreme Court case here in Vermont that says that all students deserve an equitable education regardless of their zip code. That is not happening right now with our current funding formula. So right now, we are against Brigham.
And the adjusted weights were an attempt to make that happen,
Yes.
but it didn't work.
Didn't work. Right.
And so that foundation formula would be the same for each district, even if, say, you know, whatever district that Chittenden County becomes, which probably has a much higher percentage of, say, English language learners that are more expensive to educate, it would still be 50,000 for each student. So proportionally, they could have higher education expenses and still get the same.
The base rate would be the same, but if they have more, everybody has the weights. So it's the base,
The weights are added to the,
So the weights are,
yeah.
incorporated in somehow to the.
okay,
yeah. So it'd be very similar to what we have
so it's the
now.
base plus.
Yeah, it's the base
Base.
plus your weighted student count.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is an attempt at equality, right? At fixing the Brigham problem. If we're
Yes.
talking about this as a Brigham problem, it's an
Yes.
attempt at fixing it.
The Brigham Challenge.
Challenge, that's a good word for it.
I did listen to Jake testify one time a month or so ago, and I literally texted him afterwards, like, you made my head spin. And I don't know if that's even anywhere near fruition right now, what you testified on that one day.
The state guarantee?
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out the mechanism that you were just describing. And how H454 has a different construct, but it's pretty punitive. And it has a lot of it has this like system where you could only generate as much as the school district with the lowest grand list per kid. And then any extra that you generate, because your grand list, your property value is more, it goes into the school construction fund. So it's pretty punitive, and it would siphon a lot of property tax money away from the ed fund and into the separate fund that doesn't exist. So that kind of creates pressure on its own, but it's clever.
Yeah.
It was thought of by the chair of Ways and Means, and it's pretty smart.
To try to fund a construction.
The way she did it to make the math work out is different than the way the administration proposed, which was also clever, but I don't know, didn't fly.
Yeah.
All right, we've got Rhett next.
I thought of that as like a luxury tax. Can you clarify that a little bit more? It's not a luxury tax, it's got related to property values? That way that they just talked about funding this school construction fund?
I'm totally looking to these guys,
Yeah.
because I get the consolidation part, I do not get the funding part.
I can
Just
read
like-
really quickly from Julia Richter, who's from the Joint Fiscal Office. So the supplemental district spending is what it's called, so that you're allowed to vote to approve supplemental district spending above and beyond your education opportunity spending. It's raised through a local supplemental district spending rate, and the rate is calculated in a manner so that all school districts could raise the same amount above the foundation formula at the same tax rate, regardless of property wealth. As a result, the rate would be set so all districts have the same taxing capacity as the district with the lowest property wealth. So it'd be based on, let's see, so specifically, the supplemental district spending tax rate would be calculated by dividing a district's per pupil supplemental district spending by the supplemental district spending yield. The yield would be calculated as the amount of property tax revenue per long-term ADM, I'm assuming what that is, that would be raised in the school district with the lowest taxing capacity at a rate of $1 per 100 equalized education property value.
I think I mean, it is deep in there. The important things to know about it are that, so the district would get this big pot of money called educational opportunity payment, or the foundation formula amount, right? And then you could spend over it, and it would be exposed to a yield, kind of like now we have, we all talk about the yield quite a bit. So, but the difference is that the yield could be determined very early, and it wouldn't be a function of what other districts do. Right now, it's a function of what other districts do. So that's an improvement, and then you'd calculate your rate. You'd say like, oh, I wanna spend an extra $2,000 a kid, and the yield is $4,000, so that's gonna be like 50 cents, right? Cause 2,000 divided by 4,000 is 0.5, right? So, So that's the way we would experience it. And we would be able to raise the same as everybody else, and it's possible that, or it's likely the districts will raise more than they actually need for their kids. But to prevent a Brigham problem, the extra amount is gonna go into a separate pot.
That's the school construction pot.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just have a clarifying question, Tim, and then we'll go to you. When you say, that was helpful, I think I'm close to there. When you say the yield is 4,000 and let's say we need to raise another 2,000 per kid, is that how you put it?
Yeah.
So the rate is 50 cents, that would be an extra 50 cents on the dollar for taxes? Is that what you mean when you say the
Yeah.
rate? Okay,
Yeah.
and then the way the law is written right now, what they're saying is everybody in the state is gonna get a 50% tax rate if they wanna do this supplemental spending, or no matter what, whether or not they wanna do the supplemental spending. Like if Montpelier-Roxbury, or our new mega district, wanted to do the supplemental spending, the other 4 districts would have to do it too? If we
No.
were at 5, no, okay.
You can always choose, but
Okay.
every district that wanted to do 2,000 would have an extra 50-cent rate. If that makes sense.
But
You
if-
could choose to do 0.
Right, but if another district wanted to do 3,000, they would have a 0.75
Yep.
rate? Even if we wanted, so then how is the rate the same statewide? I thought that was part of it.
Which rate?
They pay a tax rate the same as every other,
If they're spending the same amount per kid, it would be the same, but they have the choice on how much above the foundation
Got it.
formula that they wanna spend.
okay, all right. Tim?
Dumb this down a little bit for me, like, right now we present a budget to people. Is that still happening? Okay, so that's off the table, and so what we present.
That's a really good
Good
question.
starting,
No,
good starting
It's a really
point.
good question, I'm not like, I'm giggling at your kind of tone, but I'm not giggling at the question is a very good one.
So we're not presented a budget, that's this base amount that is, we're all presumed to spend. The only thing that's being presented to voters and the only way that a voter of a district can interact with this question is the question of supplemental. Can they decrement it too? Can they say no? So
We will no longer, with a foundation formula, vote on a budget. That's not to say the community wouldn't have input on a budget. I think that
how does that work? Like,
the
what's
input would be more of like feedback gathering of programming and, things we do currently, right?
It's softer, not like a hard vote.
Right, exactly,
Uh-huh.
but there would be no town meeting day vote on a budget that could go down,
Only on this supplemental deal.
only on the supplemental deal. Looking at it.
Under these brand new voting wards, right?
Right,
And would like bonding be the same? Like say a district wanted to.
For a new building, for a new high
Yeah,
school, for
Build a
example.
new high school or,
that is, my understanding of that is for legislation they still have to tackle.
Yeah,
Because so like Massachusetts has a pretty good, and Rhode Island, I understand, I think, have a pretty good school construction way where it's like carrots and sticks, if North Country wants to build a new high school and they need a bond for it, and they're going to close some school buildings in order to make that happen, that's beneficial to this plan, right? That might be approved. But if Colchester High School wants to build a new high school because they want a new high school, I'm just picking on my buddy Amy in Colchester, like there's no reason why I would think that, but then that might not be approved, right?
so it wouldn't be local voters who vote up or down on the bond, it's something happening at the state level saying?
I think there's more, that has not been decided yet,
Okay.
like
Right,
all of that still needs to be worked out.
the board recommending it to the state instead of approving it.
That's what happens in Massachusetts, like there's a whole bunch of community
Interesting.
input and the state has to approve it eventually and the state kicks in money, a percentage of it if it hits these buckets and.
But so what are the boards left doing? Hiring and firing superintendents, basically.
policy,
Policy.
and determining if programming is, you know,
Right,
if
as
programming matches
Right.
the desires.
accountability.
Boards in bigger districts would be less tied to local communities and more of a political entity.
Yeah.
Would be an outcome of this.
It would definitely be an outcome.
So which books
And-
to keep in the library?
Yeah.
And probably boards need to be looked at more of stepping stones to other things.
Well.
Yes.
if
I mean, it isn't now?
You'd
If there
run
are-
for
If
it.
there are only 5 districts and you're talking about 25 board
Roughly,
members, that's a
exactly.
pretty powerful position. It's more powerful than being in the House. Those,
Whoa.
Yeah, that's what's
and
outlined in this.
And a lot of money is gonna get poured in based on this report from
This
the
is
person
the
at UVM. If you're only
professor's
talking about
thing.
25 total board members in the state, there's gonna be massive funding that comes from all kinds of national interests that is gonna get involved in supporting candidates. So that's a, you know, that's, I don't know what the governor wants, but I don't know that anyone necessarily wants massive federal financial support coming in to decide on these really, really powerful positions that end up swaying hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, powerful unless they don't really have any decisions that they make, other than oversight of the superintendent.
No, but I think if you look at school boards nationally in bigger districts, it's a stepping stone to
Sure.
state legislation. And,
Sure.
you know, groups like Moms of Liberty, and I'm sure some liberal groups that I don't know about, probably pay a lot of money to ensure that their views are represented on said school board. And if they are in charge of the superintendent of schools, the position does have a significant amount of power, right? And if their boss is telling them that they need to move the district in a certain direction, they're gonna move the district in a certain direction, so, or they're out of job. So there are consequences there through the power over the superintendent.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think you will get more politicized boards, as you mentioned, but I think some issues that we don't talk about a lot, that if you watch boards in other states.
Oh,
that
yeah.
don't talk about a lot, will become talked about
Yeah.
more.
yeah.
I do wanna just reiterate that I don't believe the governor's plan will come to fruition. I think there's too many problems in it, so I do wanna, however, that's the plan on the table, right?
Yeah.
Amani had a question.
Oh, Amani
Sorry.
and then Red.
Well, I actually wanted to reply to what Rhett was saying, like, yeah, you're totally right, like, Daniela Sutherland's article is fascinating and should be read because it hits every point of the governor's plan that seems like it won't work. And it's gonna have currently there are 900 board members in Vermont, that would go down to 25. And there are 150 Vermont House of Representatives. And what I appreciated most in her article was just her stating that even though we can't afford to implement the governor's plan, we can't afford to continue with the current system. And I think that this is a very important article, and also I think that anyone looking at the governor's plan should see many red flags, because it just doesn't seem possible for a state that loves its local roots and the small schools that are there by necessity over choice. And I think that class size is definitely talked about a lot, but I think there's a difference between meeting the minimum class size and having a mandatory amount in every class. Cause also when you said in your presentation K through 8 and then 9 through, or K through 3 and then 4 through 12.
4 through 12.
How is that even categorized? Because in high school you aren't in classes by grade theoretically.
It's a question we've asked.
Okay.
What did you want to say?
I have 2 separate questions. One's very speculative, they're both really speculative, but
Favorite
one of them
kind.
is a little bit more
Might be wrong.
pertinent. I mean, the first question is, does anyone have a sense of why the governor has more faith in the Senate than the House to make adjustments to 454?
I think it's the Senate makeup between Republicans and Democrats.
But,
There's a
okay,
slimmer majority of Democrats.
but I'm sure, I'm sure, rural spaces and population density has a big effect, could almost have a greater effect than
Yeah.
whether you're on the left or the right.
Yeah.
My question
You're right
is,
there.
if you're talking about a foundation formula, which I think there's pretty clear, it seems like some variation of that will come through. Currently, the foundation formula in the House bill is more than our current per pupil spending.
The base, before the weights are applied.
Yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit, but go ahead.
But you suggested that we wouldn't have to adjust the way that we think of our budget next year. But if the tea leaves are at the bottom of the cup and they suggest that the foundation formula is gonna change our budget dramatically, would we want to begin to address those changes in next year's budget? Because we don't wanna get hit too hard, we don't wanna hit our teachers too hard, and we don't wanna hit our programming too hard. The way we kind of, had to last year.
If we know what that will be and it's modeled well, then yes, we will need to start
Could be a
thinking.
really hard year.
Yeah, we will need to start thinking that way. If we know what the number's gonna be.
Right.
And we can model
And
it
if it's
out.
gonna be smaller, cause right now it's bigger.
I don't think it's gonna stay that way.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Tammy Colby did her modeling, my understanding of it is based on what it would take to get schools to proficiency with an MTSS model. Which is why hers is more costly. The governor's plan adequacy amount, just so the board understands, like, if you look at those staffing ratios, they said one interventionist per 450 place school. They had central offices without human resource offices for one of their mega districts, right? They didn't have that in their plan. Like, there's gaping holes that are not accounted for in that number, in that adequacy number from the governor's plan.
Okay, Jim, and then I'm gonna go.
But in terms of planning though, is the foundation formula gonna come in with the, so, I mean, we obviously don't know any of this, but if the foundation formula with the structural change comes in at the same time, then planning we might do, that first year for the next board, they might be looking at, a district that includes all of Washington County or a lot of things, so, so it might be moving teachers around, it might be a totally different superintendent.
We're gonna play beer pong to get to where the finalists.
To be superintendent.
We've got a whole game planned out.
So we might not have any.
Do you have an advantage with that?
I don't know. Maybe.
We can talk later.
Yeah, you're an athlete. But,
I don't know if I want that job.
yeah, but it seems like there would be a planning challenge in terms of, it's not just our district with a different foundation formula, it could be a totally different district
Right.
where,
Yes.
teachers are moved around, schools are consolidated, et cetera, so
Yes,
it might be hard to insulate us from the impacts.
right. By people who don't know the schools
Yeah,
and the people.
So.
or two would have different priorities.
Rhett and Jim have started moving us in this direction, but I wanted to, first of all, I really appreciate you sharing all of this with us and with the community, because I think on the, just at the very basic level, having this as an agenda item for a board meeting, it just helps inform the community, which we all should be paying attention to this, and people should be forming their own opinions about whether or not we should consolidate at all, and if they agree with you that doing nothing is not sustainable, et cetera, et cetera. And also agree with Daniela of UVM that doing nothing is not sustainable. And if there's any things that we as a board, any decisions or conclusions that we as a board might want to come to, I'd like to move that conversation in that direction. Not saying that we have to come to those decisions tonight, but there is something interesting here to me that you say there are people lobbying right now about this bill that we may not agree with. The stances that those lobbyists are taking, and if we want to make sure that our perspective is heard, and I don't even know if we as a board have a perspective, but if we want to make sure our perspective is heard, we should probably share that with each other so that we might want to actually get in on that game. I don't know, but it's something that I think is worth discussion for us to have.
The SBA is definitely lobbying quite a bit.
Yep. Yeah, maybe we should start there, is maybe I should ask it as a question, not so much as like, what do we as a board think, but what are the other,
Yeah,
what are the
Vs,
forces
what are the
of,
Vs doing?
I guess, what are the Vs doing, but also like, I'll just say my opinion is, I think doing nothing is not sustainable. And so if there are major forces that are saying maintain status quo, I do think that's a problem. So I'd like to know if somebody's speaking up. I'm not saying like, I think 454 is a great bill, but if they're like, who's helping push this in a good direction?
Yeah, so Jake is absolutely correct. The VSA and the VSBA have done significant pushes to try to make this bill that's been presented, and the strike-through version of it, as student and school-friendly as possible. Like, one piece that's missing from a lot of testimony are the students in all of this.
Well, there's nothing about outcomes
Yeah, no, yeah.
in any of the
exactly.
plans.
So, the VSA and the VSBA have taken the tack that they see the writing on the wall in terms of consolidation probably needing to happen, in terms of a different financial formula. And so if those things are happening, a timeline, right? Let's do this as conducive as possible to schools. Let's make sure we testify. Now, they have also created some enemies probably isn't the word. They've made some people very angry about taking these positions who are members of their organizations because they don't agree with that position. One, for instance, is that in H54, it pretty much gets rid of a supervisory union structure, which is school district, and then a supervisory union board. It gets rid of that structure, and we have supervisory unions in the state who really like that structure. And don't want that to change at all, mostly because of small schools, right, and local control. So they're very angry that the VSA and the VSBA have provided testimony, thank you, and have backed that part of the bill. They're taking the stance of, we could either oppose the whole thing, or we could play in the sandbox and try to make it as good as possible. And that's the tack they've taken. So the NEA has not been a huge voice in this conversation. I think they're waiting to see where everything falls, and then they'll maybe become a voice. They are the most powerful lobbying group up there, and they've been relatively silent.
Interesting.
And so that's kind of challenging. The VPA has taken the VSA and VSBA's lead on this. So, well, that's a long answer too. Like, there are people trying to work towards making it as feasible as possible. Right? Like, that timeline that the governor put out is not feasible. It's not good for kids. It's not good for staff. It's not good for communities. And so that was my focus, to really push against that timeline.
Yeah. Tim, you were.
Yeah, I was hoping that, and I don't know if this is a fair question, or if you could characterize this, but if we could draw a bubble around our students and our taxpayers in Montpelier-Roxbury district. Is this bill good for the Montpelier-Roxbury district? And that is to say, is there a greater likelihood of both educational outcome benefits and tax relief? Or is there a substantial risk of harm from going forward? Again, just for our district. I'm really curious to hear like sort of what problem this is solving for Montpelier-Roxbury.
So it would be, moving to a different foundation formula across the state would be a tax rate that people can anticipate and wouldn't have huge swings like we see now. So that would be a benefit to the Montpelier-Roxbury taxpayer. That's the thought anyway. In terms of our students, we would have a larger high school. And with a larger high school, because we'd probably merge our high school with U32, right? Probably our middle school students would come here to this building. But with a larger high school, with more kids in a high school, you can offer more things. So programming could potentially be expanded for our kids. And expanded for kids across the state, I should say too, with larger high schools and when we're just looking at high schools. As far as our K through 8 population, there would be, if I were just to focus on the tea leaves I can read, there would be a change in the makeup of who they're going to school with. So if because we can't have 5 through 8 Wash Central and Montpelier-Roxbury students in Main Street Middle School that can't fit. So we'd probably change our middle school structure. So we'd probably have a 6 through 8 building.
Okay, I think you're presuming something that maybe it's clear, but would the result of H 454 be we're with Wash Central? Is that sort of what the?
Yeah, at least, yeah.
Okay,
That's almost like the guarantee
okay,
district.
all
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
If not additional districts to that one.
yeah. The
right,
question is who's joining us, not are we joining?
And that's based on like a minimum number of pupils in a district, is that what we're
Yeah,
basing it on?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
because right now we wouldn't meet the minimums as our district alone, but would we meet them with, in the H 454, but would we meet them with Wash Central?
we are just, right now, with our population at Montpelier High School, we are just below that minimum. And then when I
Of
say
a high
just,
school of 450 kids is the minimum that's written in the bill right now?
Just ours is just below it,
Yeah.
you're saying?
but even with that, our district size would be way below the
District
minimum
size.
if they decide on a district size, right? So if we were to merge with U32, depends on the district size, we would be around 3,000 students.
Which is in the,
Depends on what they decide. So it's
But 2
within the
4
research base, it may not be within what the legislation decides.
Because right now, H 454 instructs the Committee on the Future of Education, I think, to present them with 3 options for district sizes, right?
For essentially district maps,
District maps, 3 different district mapped
which
options.
they'd have to figure out the district sizes.
Yeah, and then the legislature would then decide between those. And one of the ones that's being talked about now, but isn't written in the legislation, is district sizes between 2,000 to 4,000 kids,
Yes.
right?
I think on the tax front, everybody would like property taxes to be lower. The way the governor's plan does it is by spending less on education. And the way H 454 does it is by trying to create new tax classifications to get at second homeowners. Which if you could charge them more, then that would maybe provide relief to, regular primary residence homeowners. But the second homeowners thing is like really, really difficult, no precedent in any other state, so it's quite a nut to try to crack.
What do you mean?
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Nobody does that, like Hawaii, 2 counties in Hawaii do it, but it's on the backbone of a really different zoning system. Hawaii also has 1 school district for
Yeah.
everybody's information.
Their superintendent has to fly to the different islands.
That sounds awesome. I mean, it's also Hawaii, so.
Well, we're not gonna compete with their salaries, so.
I mean, at this point, like, we see it as kind of like a Hail Mary, like, just so hard to do. Like even defining what a second home is, identifying them, and then, just wicked hard, so. I don't know what's gonna happen with that.
Well, when it comes to taxes, the main drivers are the fact that health insurance costs keep going up so dramatically, and our statewide, our population is still growing. And so outside of this bill, obviously they're not gonna put it in this bill, but they could tackle healthcare costs and they could tackle housing.
But how does the foundation formula solve that? Then you said it'll be more predictable if it's a foundation formula and whatnot, but if we still have the same 18% healthcare and other
Great
cost
question.
pressures, how, is it just more predictably large?
No, it wouldn't change based on healthcare. I believe there's like an inflationary rate baked in each year to increase the foundation formula.
Well, then does that just starve us?
Yeah,
Just squeezes
It just
Yeah.
means we would have to cut programming.
yeah.
Or do that supplemental tax thing on top of whatever the foundation formula is providing us.
Well, that sounds like a kind of sneaky way to starve a school.
It's not very sneaky. I mean, I
Okay,
think they're
so-
pretty, pretty out there about it.
It's not that different than the current state. I mean, we're squeezed by the cost of healthcare every year, you know?
Well, we can take it to the voters. Well, you're saying we can with the local tax.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
supplemental tax would be taken to the voters.
I see, okay.
Right. Unless they put limits on what could be in the supplemental education spending. If they said it can only be for, you know, this, that, and the other, then you're kinda, you know, in some trouble.
The only way to save money in our system is to decrease staff, right? And I'm saying staff is the large staff, right? So that means the governor's going after administrators, because us mean administrators make so much money, right? But if you make the 5 mega districts and cut central office staff, first of all, your central offices are gonna be ginormous with that many kids, so it's not that many people, right? And then, secondly, everybody's teacher's salary and all the other staff salaries are gonna increase, right? And there's way more of them than there are administrators that you're gonna cut. And so that cost will be a significant increase to budgets to bring up salaries, because like if we look at the Chittenden County, right, mega district there is no way that the teachers in South Burlington, who are our highest paid teachers in the state, are gonna do Franklin Northeast salaries, right? So you're gonna probably give South Burlington a little bump
Makes sense.
in the negotiation process, and that all of those salaries in every other district, current district that becomes one, will need to match that. They'll have to have one. There's way more people there than there are central office administrators that you're gonna cut with 5 district plan. So just on that fact alone, the governor's plan does not save money, right? Because they're also saying, no, in no place in here am I talking about closing small schools, right? That's been stated multiple times by the governor and his team. Well, you have to. You have to lower staff beyond central office employees in order to save money, because that's where all the money comes, right? That's where all of our budgets are, 75 to 80% salaries and benefits across the board. So you have to do something to reduce that number in order to save money in education.
I have a question about the sort of comparative document that you put together, MRPS compared to the funding model. And I think you talked about this and I didn't fully get it. I wasn't looking at this at that moment. This PICUS, what is PICUS?
Yeah, so when the agency's team was rolling out the governor's plan in a slow roll, they were basing a lot of work on a plan, and I can link it in here so you can see it. Picus is the last name of Larry Picus. The guy who wrote the plan was somebody else, but it's just known as the Picus Report. And there's some interesting testimony by Picus in a joint, I don't know if you guys saw this one, in a joint Ways and Means Finance, Senate Finance, House Ed, and Senate Ed Committee, which I can find the date, where he said, I didn't do Vermont numbers, I did general numbers, and they took my general numbers and put it in a Vermont context, which doesn't work, right?
Picus said that?
Yeah.
Picus said that.
So
Okay.
the Picus report is based on a national look at what I think you asked this in a question, what they call evidence-based or adequate staffing. And it's a national norm. So So it's not based on what the rules and statutes and expectations in Vermont are. So for instance, we by law have to have an effective MTSS model. Well, you need human resources to run an effective MTSS model. It's just a fact. And so, but the staffing has one interventionist, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
That's not an effective MTSS model. You cannot run one with one interventionist. So with 450 kids. So the PICUS report is based on 450 kids, which the governor's team based their staffing amounts on, which then fed into the foundation formula, the adequacy amount that they had at 13 something, right? The interesting thing about that, though, is that if you look at PICUS, his report is based on a student of an elementary school of 450 students. But the 5-district model isn't based on that, right? And our schools across Vermont aren't based on that, right? Our UES school is barely there, but you get lower than 200 kids in a school building, and I think you're closing something like 150 school buildings in Vermont. So it's not based on the Vermont context at all. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I was told by a high-level agency official that when she looked at UES staff, at the PICUS report and UES staffing, that it matched, that we were in no trouble whatsoever. So I wanted to test that theory out because I didn't believe that was accurate. And when I looked at all, so UES is 400 students, which is 89% of what PICUS is saying at 450 students. So what's the difference there? And then my notes as to where things are funded, and you can see that Union Elementary School has a difference of 41 staff members. So a difference of 50 staff. Sorry, I was flipping on the wrong one.
Well,
50 staff members.
what I'm seeing, and this is what I'm thinking about in terms of sort of what our values are, or what we may want to add to the conversation generally, is that for a really, hopefully fully functional MTSS model, we're looking at 7.5 interventionists for 400 kids and 24 aides, compared to 1 interventionist and 2 in this comparative model. And so, is that something that we as a board would want to advocate for? I mean, on the other hand, the cost for kids I always go back to the cost per pupil that would come out when it would compare UES to RVS. And RVS was quite expensive because of scale, but in the time that you've been our superintendent, the cost per pupil at Union has increased fairly dramatically, for good reason, but, probably not what the governor would think was, the way education should be funded. So I don't know what exactly I'm trying to say, but there's something in this comparison that you have that shows me that, like, if we're advocating for something, we're advocating for something like our model to be funded at a statewide level.
So what I keep saying is that you don't achieve, and I said this with Act 127 too, so this isn't new, but you don't get to equity, which is what Brigham is asking us to do, right? By taking a system like ours that has evidence we have an effective model in place, right? And bringing us down to a level of a school district that is not adequately funded because their taxpayers don't fund it, right? Don't vote to fund it.
Can afford it.
We bring that school district up, right? And so when I testified to Senate Finance on this exact chart here, my argument was that, we probably have a couple places that we could look at for staffing, right? Like, we always have a plan B and C in our budget proposals that we could probably we could do okay. It wouldn't affect our model that much, where we could look at some positions and things like that. But we're not overly staffed, right? We're not at all. We're not an elementary school that has a special ed director in it. And there's districts that have elementary schools, and every school building has their own special education director, including a district-wide special education director. Like, we're not that district. And so when you're looking at our staffing levels, I don't think we're overstaffed. I think there are a couple areas probably that we could do better in, but we're not overstaffed.
Well, and that model, the one on the left, doesn't include custodial or cafeteria or one other thing, so it's not like we
Special
would.
educators.
Yeah, special educators, it's not like we're gonna get rid of those positions just because the governor didn't think that they are necessary in a school. Cause they're very necessary in a school. But I think what I hear you saying, Rhett, is that to sort of maybe as an answer to what I was kind of putting out there, opening up the discussion, is that if we were going to be advocating for something, we would be advocating for the model that we use at our buildings.
Yeah, and I'm agreeing with you too. I'm seeing it a different way, but I'm agreeing with you, is that we have an effective model. Let's not tear our model down simply because of a money thing. Let's build other models up so that they can match. You know, and there's school districts with much higher need than our district, so they're gonna have more, right? And that's probably where the weights come in.
I mean, kind of to state the obvious, but it seems pretty clear that the House bill is a much better deal for our district and probably the state than the governor's bill.
And the governor's plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems like it's.
Yeah, but we don't know what the Senate's gonna do to that bill.
What's
Yeah,
in the
I mean,
next-
as it stands now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But how
I
do you
mean,
define a
should
second home?
we be reaching out to our senators? We have a pretty,
Massachusetts legislators.
yeah, we have good relationships with our 3 senators.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't think it would hurt. I think the challenge for me is public perception right now. So will people come with their pitchforks if the school board and school district under my leadership really get behind a bill that could potentially merge us with 4 other districts that people may not want to merge with? Right? Like that's my concern around advocacy with this bill. I'm just being full out honest that I've shared with the BSA.
We want you to
I
be
will
honest with
testify
us.
facts about our district all day long. However, it's tricky for me to say, yeah, let's get behind a bill when I have no idea what our community thinks or
Totally.
feels about this bill.
yeah.
So that's one of the, if I have to choose between the two, I'm choosing the House bill. But I just have no idea what our community actually wants or thinks or needs. I know there are needs in the state that I can get behind. I think consolidation is a good thing to a point, right? Let's follow the research. If we're gonna do it, let's follow the research. And I think there are schools that need to be closed because they're small by choice, right? Not by necessity. And I define necessity by distance and geographic isolation more than anything else, right? And there are schools in Vermont that are like that. That's just a fact and reality. So I think there is work to be done. I just don't know if we want to get behind a bill that our community doesn't support.
Yeah,
Or may
I'm
not
not
support.
saying necessarily get behind a bill that, this body should take it, but I mean, I also think there's a reality that we're not on an island. And that the current formula, as you pointed out, isn't sustainable. And if there's not a solution that works for the state and that gets the state to a sustainable point, even if we have to give up a few things to get there, we're eventually gonna lose those anyways if an unsustainable system goes forward. And we just have, the pressures of that exerted on us year after year. So, I mean, I think we have to be honest with the community that what might not be the best for us next year, but is good for the state and makes the state sustainable, is going to be good for us long-term, because we're not on an island and we can't be on an island.
I don't think there's a huge amount of time pressure.
Yeah.
I think whatever does get passed out, there will be something passed out this year, but it'll be kind of loose. And then this Commission on Future Public Education is probably gonna be the one to design the districts
Yeah,
and present them, and then presumably in 2026, the legislature would vote on them, but that's an election year. The senator told me in the hallway that
Yeah, he's not lying.
Good point.
It's
he
the
thought, he
reality.
didn't think that would happen, so that would be 2027. So I think this might be pretty drawn out,
So it's,
That's when we'll hear public opinion. Once people see a map, I think that's when
Yeah.
we will hear from people.
Well, a map that's in legislation, because there's certainly been
Sure,
maps
no,
that have
but you
been
know, something
shared.
that looks like it's gonna be
Yeah.
voted on as the thing,
You-
you know?
You had mentioned in an email, Libby, that it might be a good idea to have a community forum or several with our community to go beyond just, you know, the people who watch on Orca getting caught up on all of this and as Jim was saying, you know, helping everybody understand we're not on an island, and so we may have to make some difficult choices. And that,
Communities are doing that with their legislatures, and it's very interesting.
oh yeah, okay, Jill, what were you?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I get worried that I wanna make sure that our superintendent can still do the super quiet, peaceful, non-challenging day-to-day job that you already have. So I worry about us as a school board or our superintendent, you know, sort of setting an expectation that we're hosting forums and things like that. I think that is the responsibility of our lawmakers, and we can certainly participate, but I don't wanna add more physical like work and time onto us and our superintendent to like host that level of conversation with the community, because this is not our proposal. I think the lawmakers should. I just don't wanna make a lot of work. I feel like you've already gone above and beyond in what you presented. I think it was really helpful, and we should definitely continue to be like actively interested in this. But there are years of study committees and advisory boards and things like that spelled out, and I don't want it to become Libby's full-time job to like host community forums about the legislature's plans personally.
I don't want it to become your full-time job either. I will push back a little in that I do think part of our role, and it is community engagement and the like soft skills of helping, like hearing from people and also sharing information. So I wouldn't say we have to go overboard, but I don't think we leave this just up to the legislature. I think because it's going to be us who are in the end having the conversations with our neighboring districts, and caregivers in our district are, you know, it's like you were just saying, our students will eventually be going to school and be in community with people they have not before. And so maybe it's not, you know, this spring that we need to start that kind of work, but I think there is going to need to be, in addition to the whatever is handed down from the legislature, the like on the ground grassrootsy, and I'm not talking about advocacy, I'm just talking about like who are we? Like what values do we share? What do we, I don't know, like something that will smooth the path for when it actually happens. You know, we've had a lot of rocky history when it comes to merging and unmerging, and the more that we can do, the people who are sort of like stewards of that history, the more that we can do to make it, to move the boulders out of the way and make it a smoother path, I think is a good thing.
I totally agree with what you're saying. The thing that I'm getting stuck with right now is we're not anywhere near what it is yet.
That's fair.
And I think it's really hard to engage in that type of discussion without knowing what it is.
Yeah.
I think we really wanna pay attention to it will go to committee, back to committee, right? And we really wanna pay attention to that because we have one of the most powerful senators, being Ann Cummings, who is the Senate Finance Chair, in our midst, right? I've got her on my cell phone, like there, and probably many of you do as well. So I think that is a place that could have a little bit more of an immediate impact, or might need more of an immediate impact.
Well, and we do have the work that we're going to do hopefully with Wash Central on that feasibility study, which is a little bit what I'm talking about. Like, let's at least start to understand what it could look like as a bigger community.
I would feel comfortable talking about that when it's out, because it's our thing and
Yeah.
we could speak to it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And but the legislative stuff is just so vague right now and it won't be solid enough to talk about for a while.
Okay.
Yeah, no, and I think giving like examples to the legislature of what larger districts could look like successfully is and if we can do that with the feasibility study, because I think you're right, it is gonna take a few years. And show them what a 3,000 to 5,000 district could look like, how it could come together, how it could work, is better than sitting around and waiting for them to figure something out and then freaking out about it.
Yeah.
I do agree totally too that we should, and I do think we sort of are starting to get an idea, but as this evolves, what are sort of our communities, I don't wanna say non-negotiables, but like, I think the MTSS is a great example. Like, let's come to the table with facts, and if our fact is, like, our data is showing that our model, which requires this level of resources, is helping. Like, those are things we can, like, we feel strongly and wanna advocate for like what is working. And like so yeah, I think that's a great example. Like, what are some other things our community feels really strongly that like when we are faced with this, we're not starting from scratch. Like, we'll have a feasibility study, we have some like good examples of things, we have really good data. Like, I totally do agree with that. Like, we should kind of have a temperature of our district as it is now, so that when we are inevitably paired up or whatever, we kind of know where we're all at, so we can advocate on that community's behalf. Absolutely.
All right. Knowing that this is a continuing conversation, does anyone have final thoughts for tonight?
I kind of kept quiet because you're all brilliant and I didn't have anything to contribute, but I do think that you can't understate the impact of the healthcare. It still sometimes feels like we're moving deck chairs around a little bit.
Yes.
And on, I think it was NPR the other day, there were a couple of superintendents, one of whom had 16 boards.
Yes, that's
Elaine Collins,
Elaine up in North Country.
not 16 board members, 16 boards.
That's all she does.
And
And she's wonderful. She's a
I'm
phenomenal
sure,
superintendent.
and I can't remember if it was her or if it was Brooke, the other superintendent, but like they were also talking about like they were one of the communities whose budget,
Yeah.
like they're one of the ones that hopefully would benefit from a foundation formula because their community is not willing to vote the budget that they needed to provide what they proposed. Their community is what they needed to provide to their students. So I think that is one of the objectives, right, is to like bring some equity to those districts that because of property tax pressures and because of the sort of micro local decisions, there are students that are currently not getting what they do need, right? So we may not be one of those communities and we can say, here's what our data is showing us. But I look at Montpelier-Roxbury and we've already made really painful decisions. We are a unified, one board, one superintendent. I think we're kind of lean and mean. I don't think we operate with a lot of fluff. So I don't know where else I would go under this, and it is really painful to say, to know that sort of like with groceries right now, it's like, oh, I think I'm saving money on dog food, but then my groceries are still X amount. In other words, if healthcare is not in some way addressed, it's just gonna continue to sort of strangle the actual education provisions for students without it being about outcomes or students at all. So I haven't really noticed that. I know people talk about it and say healthcare and housing, but
it's not in the legislation.
there's not like an easy answer for that. And so I'm worried we could go through some pretty major machinations with education governance, and until we've like addressed those things, I'm not sure it's gonna provide some magic solution to
100%.
savings.
Yeah, you're 100% correct.
I do want to recall that as a board, we supported Act 127 and publicly and to whomever we sent our letters to or whatever, and the consequences of that were pretty devastating for some members of our community. So I only say that because not taking a stand on something, I think is not what we did in the past. That's not what we did in the past. We didn't just say nothing, we supported increased equity, changed weights, that changed our situation pretty dramatically. I have a really hope that if there are small schools that need to be closed, that there are rules and requirements so that it's coming from law and not coming the way it happened for us.
And I testified on that that last statement right there. That if there are closures, then there has to be support for communities who experience it in terms of building, in terms of like how do you rebuild or how do you keep that connection? Like there needs to be state resources dedicated to that piece. And there needs to be a logical process to follow.
Appreciate the conversation, thanks for
Yeah.
educating us on
Thanks
this.
again, Libby.
Yeah. Send any questions my way.
All right, so we are then moving on to policy monitoring. We have 3 here. C29, the diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. F1, the travel reimbursement policy, and C28, transgender and non-conforming students policy.
Quite the trio. Travel
It's a real
reimbursement
through line
doesn't
there.
really fit.
Is there a motion to
I move
approve?
we accept the policy monitoring reports.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion or questions about them? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
Did we miss an item?
Oh, did I miss an item? Oh, I'm so sorry, the policy reading. Thank you very much, Tim. Policy E1, we're doing the second reading. And I'll kick it over to Jill.
Yeah, so we
To lead
as,
this one.
Libby has shared this with and hosted conversations with the various caregiver groups. We've had our first and second reading. The policy committee reviewed some of the questions and had some further questions from like the administrators and the community, the caregiver councils, which Libby has responded to. So we do have an evolving draft that we can come back with that would be reflective of all of those pieces. I think this might actually have quite a bit of it. I don't know which version this is, but we're getting to the point where we can actually provide sort of our final report to legal to get just the final review and make sure we're not undoing something we couldn't undo. But generally very minor things, right? Like the reference to parent versus caregiver versus family. There were a lot of good conversations in the comments and questions that might be really good things to think about, but may not be like a policy thing, might just be like good information to have or good examples, but maybe doesn't have to be written into a policy. And just as a reminder for folks, this is a prescribed policy regarding specifically parent and family engagement under Title I, Part A. And so how can we ensure that there's genuine engagement and communication and dialogue between the district and parents and caregivers of students here. So this is a required policy. So we will, I think maybe what we could do, I'm still a little new to the policy chair, but maybe we could go through the whole thing when we have like a final to really walk through with everybody and answer any final questions before we do a final reading.
Yeah.
Just to walk the board through it and make sure everyone can answer any questions anyone has.
Because there will be a third reading and then a vote at the following meeting? Is that
Yeah,
our
sometimes we
process?
just do third reading, but
I think this one deserves a third reading.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, Anna warns it as a policy adoption.
Right,
And
an agenda item that is a policy, okay. So right now, it's just there as, take a look at it and know that the policy committee is still doing a little bit of work, I heard you say?
yeah, it looked like you got through all of our questions. If you do see any things that you have questions about, feel free to email me and we can add it into the Google Doc, but
Okay.
it's gotten pretty well vetted through a lot of good eyes.
Okay, but no vote tonight, nothing we need to vote on for this tonight?
No, I don't think we
Okay.
should. We have some questions and answers going back and forth over the
Okay.
Google Doc.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks for catching that, Tim. Now, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, thanks, Scott. Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Good night, everyone.